Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second webinar in our four-part Asset Operations live webinar series. I'm so excited for today's panel discussion as we have some amazing industry experts joining us today, in addition to Upkeep CEO and founder Ryan Chan. Now, a common theme in maintenance, manufacturing, and business is the fact that there is simply too much disorganized data out there. If companies can't access accurate, targeted information in the moments they need it, they won't be able to make smart, informed decisions. So today's panel discussion will focus on why it is so important that your data flows into one central command center. Now, before we introduce our panelists, we have a few housekeeping items to cover. Today's session is being recorded and will be available on demand following the conclusion of the event. Time permitting, we'll also host a brief Q&A at the end of the conversation, so please submit your questions in the Q&A feature on the side of your screen, and we'll try our best to get to as many as possible. And on that note, I'll hand it over to Ryan Chan to kick off today's panel discussion. Ryan, take it away.
All right. Thank you so much, Blair. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I just wrote in the chat, but the way that we run these webinars are very interactive. So in the chat right now, feel free to introduce yourself. Tell us, who you are, where you're dialing in from, and I don't know, one interesting thing that you want to take away from either today or one interesting thing about yourself. Thank you again, Blair, for helping host today's webinar, and thank you again to everyone for joining us. Oftentimes we get people from all around the world. All right. I wanted to start today's discussion with a little bit of background first. Before we jump in, back in 2021, Upkeep really brought maintenance, reliability, and operations teams together in this new approach called asset operations. We've written this book on this topic of asset operations and why it's critical for our future of this industry. And I'm really excited to announce that this book is finally complete after months and months of work in the making. We've released it. It's available on Amazon. And every single dollar that we generate from this book is actually donated straight back to the community. And you can get a copy on Amazon if you haven't already. In this book, what I want to say too, is that this book would not have been possible without all of our contributions from the Upkeep team, our customers, the community, and these two folks and many other people that help participate as subject matter experts in creating this book. We've got two amazing, incredible subject matter experts with us for today's discussion. All right, I'm seeing the chat light up. We've got Davis from Delaware. We've got Kevin from Dubai. Oh my gosh, San Francisco, New York, Colorado, Brazil, Houston, Virginia. It's really cool to see all these names, all these different faces and locations calling in from all across the country, all across the world. Even have someone from London, UK. I'll be there in 2 weeks, actually.
Hey, my wife's there.
All right, let me jump in. Let's give a warm welcome to the two hosts or two panelists that we have today. We've got George Williams, who is the founder and CEO of Reliabilityx. And also with me and us here today, we've got James Reyes-Picknell, who's the director and principal consultant at Conscious Asset. It's really great to have both of you here with us and also celebrate this launch of the Asset Operations book that went live, just about 2 weeks ago. It's really awesome to be able to have you here and talk about your unique expertise in this field. Why don't we jump in and do like a quick round of introductions? Tell us a little bit more about who you are, how you got involved in this industry, maybe one interesting fact about yourself. George, you want to kick it off?
Yeah, sure, Ryan. Thanks. My name is George Williams, founder and CEO of Reliabilityx. Oh my goodness, how did I get involved in maintenance? Well, I went to Votech High School, thought I'd be an electrical engineer. That didn't work out because I had a young family, so maintenance it was. And then several years later, a master's degree and lots of other fun stuff. But for me, what I love about this industry is how open and sharing this community is and continually allowing others to learn and succeed. So I'm happy to be a part of it. Thanks, Ryan.
All right. Thank you so much, George. And James?
Yeah, well, good to be here again, Ryan, and with George. My background, I'm a mechanical engineer. I graduated in 1977, so I've been around a while. My first role outside of university was actually as a ship's engineer in the Canadian Navy. So very practical, hands-on operations and maintenance combined. And that's kind of how I got into maintenance. Middle of the ocean, things don't work. You learn pretty quick. So from there, I went on petrochemicals. I got into shipbuilding, aerospace, avionics, and eventually into consulting. And I think the only continent I haven't worked on so far is Antarctica. I'm not sure that there's much in terms of industrial facilities down there yet, but yeah, a load of experience. I've authored books on maintenance management, reliability-centered maintenance, and a couple of others, all of which are intended to help share as I get closer to the end of my career. Spread the wealth around, and the wealth is basically knowledge, and that's why I like to participate in these things with Ryan and George and others.
Thank you so much, George and James, for donating your time to, helping educate and have discussions about the industry and how we can really learn more, do more to push the industry forward. These two people I've gotten the opportunity to know over the past several years, and I can genuinely say that these are two of the nicest people that I know, and also just two amazing individuals that want to do great for this industry. So again, thank you, George and James, for joining us. All right, so what I'm gonna do is give a quick high-level overview behind what asset operations means. After that, we're gonna jump into a few questions. What I've always done and what I've always said, though, is that these questions are dynamic. I want us to have a discussion. I want you all as audience members, joining us live to ask questions, drop it into the chat. What we're going to do is try to answer these questions and weave it within our discussion today. My promise to you is that you're not going to be bored. And if you do, then I failed at my job. So let's jump in. I'm going to give a very, very quick overview of what asset operations is. So asset operations is really this vision behind this idea that maintenance, reliability, and operations department really work together as this unified team. That really shares a single data repository for the foundation of communication and collaboration. It's really shifting the entire life cycle away from just what they do and instead to why they do what they do. This is what it looks like. Our vision is that the asset interactions is not just between maintenance looking at it from a repairs perspective, operations looking at it from a production perspective, and reliability looking at it from a longevity perspective. Instead, asset operations is this view that maintenance, reliability, operations come together under one central data repository where it's a foundation for collaboration and communication, where they're viewing the entire life cycle of the asset, where they're viewing the data and health outcomes based off of business metrics and the entire health metrics of the asset, not just one point in time. Today's discussion is going to be focused on two pillars outlined in our book. So, we're running a 4-part series across the 8 pillars of asset operations. We finished the first series about 2 weeks ago. This is the second series within our broader series, focused on pillars 3 and 4, collecting the right data, displaying the best insights, providing actionable feedback through a centralized command center. And pillar number 4 is this idea that data must flow into a single repository. This is what we're going to be focusing on today. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We'll jump into the questions that I've gotten to prepare. Let me just, all right. So with those 2 pillars in mind, I want to direct this first question to George. In the book, we really talk about how data collection processes can easily derail this vision of asset operations management. So I want to ask you, George, I'm sure we've all heard this term before. Garbage in equals garbage out. What does that mean to you? And how do you see this present in today's like maintenance, reliability, operations teams within, industrial plants and whatnot?
Wow, that's a gigantic question. But the short answer is really it's multifaceted. So garbage in, garbage out typically applies to, if it's not standardized, if you don't ask for it to be collected consistently, then you end up with data that's not usable or not as usable, right? If you're accounting for 40% of your time in the system, you can't say, I know the most expensive asset to maintain. It doesn't exist. You don't have enough information. And so the garbage in, garbage out piece is multifaceted because the data must be standardized using things like value lists, don't allow for human error, that type of stuff to kind of minimize data quality issues. The second piece is if you want it, you better require it. If you're not going to require it, it's not likely they're going to collect it, right? The third piece, though, is a balancing piece, because I am a big fan of a mantra that I use, which is I can always choose to use data I've collected. I can never choose to use data I didn't collect. However, at the shop floor level, if you're going to ask them to collect it, you better use it. So create standardization, get rid of the human error factor, and actually use the data. You'll have good consistency, good data quality, and people will know you're doing it for a reason. So they trust that when you ask them to do something, there's a reason behind it that's valuable to the business. And also, I mean, if you've ever read this book, he very singularly calls out garbage in, garbage out. So James is a big fan of that mantra as well.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned so many great points, George. Yeah, obviously, there's this idea of like, yes, let's just collect all the data and store it into this big repository. Yes, that's good. That's important. You're totally right. You can always use data that you don't collect, but you can't use data that you didn't collect. I really appreciate that point. I think the point that you also brought up, though, is that when it comes to the shop floor, there is a very significant cost to collecting data. So to your point, it's so important to have a reason why you're collecting this data. The way that we look at it is like there's two types of data. One is passive data collection, and that's kind of just oftentimes like sensors just feeding in data, collecting meter readings and reports, just feeding it all into a central database. Cool. Very low cost to collecting that. But when you're talking about active data, that's technicians, the shop floor, there is a very real cost. And the cost isn't in terms of dollars necessarily. It's in terms of people's time. It's the time that it takes a technician to go out and fill out this, report, put it into a spreadsheet, bring it back to, your desktop. There's an actual time, cost, which translates into, money and dollars to business. To your point, George, it's so important to have a reason. So as we talk about garbage in, garbage out, what I hear from you is like, have an understanding of what problem you want to solve first, and then start backtracking into what is the data that I need to collect in order to validate or disprove, this problem or this hypothesis.
Yeah. I'd like to jump in a little bit on that one. Knowing what problem you have to solve is a difficult one for a lot of people in an operational environment because they haven't run into the problems yet. And so they have to have an idea of what their end goal is, and then really think through what kind of problems might I come up with down the road. And of course, what problems have I had before? But start with that. And at the end of the day, data in context becomes information. Information with a purpose becomes knowledge, and that knowledge helps you make decisions. And all this is about making decisions at the end of the day. So you have to kind of think through, as you say, start with the end in mind. I think somebody wrote that in a book, if I remember right. was it habit number one? But the idea is start with what you think you're going to be needing data for, or what decisions you need to make, really, and then work it back to what data you need to feed it. George made a really good point about people have to know you have a purpose in mind. And I think I'd go just a step beyond that. They have to know that you're actually using it for that purpose. Because if they don't, then they won't trust you. I'll take you back to the 80s when I worked in petrochemicals, I needed reliability data on some bad actor equipment in the plants I was working in, and we didn't have good computer systems to collect this for us, so it was pretty much a manual collection process. And I said to the guys in the shop, look, here's a list of equipment that we know we got problems with. Anytime one of these comes into the shop or you have to go out to service them, I want to know about it. And the reason was it would trigger me to go actually with them and find out what was going on. It was a way of collecting information. I didn't know exactly what information I needed at the time, but I needed information. And after a while of doing this, I had a better idea what I needed because I was still learning. I was a much younger engineer in those days. And the guys in the shop were saying, well, you've had to come in here like at 3 a.m, 4 a.m. sometimes. And I told them, I don't care when it is, just call me. And they did. After a while, they started to take pity on this poor guy and said, well, what is it you need to know? What can we do to help you with that information collecting? And that was a watershed moment for me because they were very interested in helping because they knew, first of all, it was needed. They knew I actually put it to use because they'd seen some of the results of it. And they wanted to participate in that because it was actually good for not just the company, but for them too. And I think if you could get that kind of participation from people, then all these data headaches we have start to go away. But we do nothing on the people side to help it. And I've heard technology people like just collect more data, the IIoT, put sensors on everything. Why? I've got a friend in a mining company, and he said, we've got sensors on our trucks, and they'll tell us where the rough spots on the road are. And he looked at this techie guy and said, all I got to do is drive down the road and I can tell you where the rough spots are. I don't need all that tech with GPS to pinpoint the spot. I can see it, and if I can't see it, I'll know it when I hit it. I think we've gone a little bit overboard sometimes on collecting data where we don't really need a lot of data to tell us what we need to know. But oddly enough, a lot of people don't trust that, I'll call it analog information, for lack of a better name. People don't trust it. It's not in a computer. It's not in a database, right? It's just something that happened. I spilt my coffee in my lap as I went over this bump, 1 kilometer down the haul road. Let's get a grader out there. That sort of thing, because there's no data on it, people are, oh, well, we'll get to it. The response to that analog stuff is super slow for some reason. Send somebody a bunch of useless data and tell them they need to act on it, and they seem to be ready to jump at it.
So the central theme here is that obviously, yes, data is so incredibly important. What I hear, though, is start from the end, start from the why. Don't just create and collect endless amounts of data. As it relates to all of this, there's 2 questions that got brought up in our chat. One by Alex. And I think, it's kind of like piecemeal together and related, but Peter also is kind of bringing up these questions around where do we store data and how do we create this single source of truth? So I think the question really is we start with the why, but then where does the data go? Is it a single platform? Is it a single system? Is it a single database? And then how do we organize all of this data in a way that helps us get to the why? Any thoughts there?
Well, so for me, it's really a matter of 10 years ago, there were too many individualized languages for where the data came from, right? Even prior to 10 years ago, you had companies where they would collect data, but it was the language they were dumping things into was not standardized or normalized, and it was proprietary. the advent of data warehousing and data lakes and all those things have kind of freed that up so that we can dump data from lots of different sources into one location and then build an analytical layer on top of that. That creates an opportunity that didn't really exist and people have struggled with for a really long time. And so you're no longer required to kind of stay a single path now in terms of the hardware that you're using and the softwares that you're using. Whereas before there was a giant push to standardize because the data couldn't be standard. Now it's not necessarily the case, although you should standardize from a parts perspective. It's not really a data problem anymore, and you don't have to have 50 analysts in knowing different languages in order to analyze information nowadays. So that piece is the first piece. It's get it all into a single platform, singular data, whatever you want to call it, right? Something like OSI Pi or Business Warehouse or wherever you're dumping your data repository. And then the analytical layer sits on top of that. And there's even options there, right? There are companies that have proprietary stuff that they build on top to create reports. And then there are companies that will build on whatever you already own. So if you're a Microsoft company, they build in Power BI. And if you're, a SAP company, they build in business objects and whatever those layers are. So I think the first piece now is to get past the fact that the data is unavailable. And most folks don't know that. They still think the data is unavailable. The data is not unavailable. We got to partner with IT and get it into the repository. That's really step one for me.
I 100% agree with that, George. To your point, it doesn't really matter whether it's in a single system or whether it's in a data warehouse. The idea here is, again, get data in one platform or in one system, repository, platform, doesn't matter, but use that as the central hub for collaboration, communication amongst both and all the maintenance, reliability, and operations teams. And then to your point, layer in the insights, then you can drive action. And you create this continuous feedback cycle that I feel like oftentimes people don't have because they're in these silos. James, were you going to say something?
One piece I think that's needed. When people ask me, where do you put the data? I say, I don't really care, right? On a computer somewhere. What matters to me is that you can access it. And you can, no matter how many layers or whatever you want to call it, whether it's on the cloud or in your own server, again, doesn't matter. If people can't get at it, they won't use it. But they have to get at it in a format that's actually useful to them. It's not just data. They have a way of getting in there to look for what they need to know. So that all that data has to have some kind of context, and there has to be some relationships amongst those contexts when you're structuring the whole thing initially, so that people can find what they need. If you got that, I think then you'll have data that's really useful. And the volume of data is not really important. In fact, if anything, I would be inclined to think that the less volume you would have is probably more indicative of the fact that you thought it through beforehand. I've had IT people say, well, we'll just collect all kinds of data and we can save it, memory's cheap. Well, maybe so, but you're just burying yourself in data that's probably not all that relevant if you don't think it through. But their answer to not thinking it through is to just save it anyways. And I'm thinking nobody's going to go and look at that ever. That you're just collecting it, and eventually you'll just pull the plug on it and it'll all go away, right? I compare data mining to mining, real mining. You got all this dirt that you got to get rid of to get at that one thing you really want. In the difference between real mining and data mining is that in real mining, nature put it there. In data mining, we're dumb enough to put it there. So it's it goes back to that very first premise. Make sure you know what it is you want to use it for, what it is you want to use, what you need to collect to make it useful, and then have a way of getting into it. So many times people cannot get that data and information that they need to make decisions, and they can't because of all kinds of silly restrictions. I'm looking at just the location I'm in right now, and some of their systems are on a cloud, some of them are internal. Their IT people don't like the stuff on the cloud because it's corporate data that's out on the cloud someplace. Well, it's corporate maintenance data, right? Like, so you've got a lockout, tagout instruction. Does that really matter if everybody on the planet knows about it? Probably not. So there's some sensibility has to come into some of the restrictions that are placed on access for people. Mm-hmm. And I'm all for just opening the doors wide and letting people at it. And there's some stuff you got to be careful about, but by far the bulk of it, you don't. And let's just let people in there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting point, because you're totally right. Like, 99% of the things that, all these restrictions are put in place, not for the 99% of people. It's for that 0.1% of one person that does it wrong and creates this additional process that gets layered on. And over a course of a decade or two, you realize that there's a process for everything. There's restrictions for everything. And to your point, James, you said the most important thing to data was the accessibility of it. And all these restrictions obviously restrict access to being able to collect and look at these data points. Yeah. So there is this balance. How do you find it?
Well, I think when it comes to balance, it's not so much about that. It's about common sense, and there's a significant lack of it when it comes to managing IT security, and even physical security sometimes. Like I'll have clients where I'll have a business case that shows, hey, across these sites you can save $100 million a year in costs, and you can actually bump availability enough to generate about another $1 billion a year in revenues. And they'll, well, can you come in and help us do this? Sure. But when I get there, they won't let me touch anything. And you're relying on me to save you big bucks, make big bucks, and you won't let me do anything. Where's the sense in that? And that same kind of problem applies with data, with information in your systems, with access in different parts of a facility, different types of data. I'll ask the finance people, look, I'm trying to build a business case here. I need to know something about your costs. Well, we can't give you that. Like, you're spending a bunch of money to have me come here and figure this stuff out for you, and you won't let me have the data I need to do it. Shall I just go make it up or find somebody with a crystal ball somewhere to help me? It's absurd, some of the restrictions that get put on you. And you see it in the IT world all the time, like all these little restrictions. And it just gets in the way. And you've got good people. You've trusted them enough to hire them and give them a paycheck. You've trained them. You've nurtured them through their careers to a point, and yet you don't trust them. Why? There's something wrong with that picture. And I don't think it's got anything to do with data. I think it's got everything to do with common sense of the people that are responsible for things. I'm looking in the chat as I hear this, but we have a security protocol. Yeah, so what? Is it actually helping you? Or is it just getting in the way? And to your point, Ryan, that 1% of 1% that you're trying to prevent from doing something nasty, why create problems for that other 99.9% just to avoid that one exception who probably can't figure it out anyways, because if he's trying to be nasty, he's probably not that smart.
George, were you about to say something?
Yeah, I mean, it's a risk management issue taken to the extreme, right? And so there are antivirus softwares that work off of whitelists versus blacklists, as they term them, right? Meaning a whitelist, it means I'm going to let things go through, and blacklist, it means it's off, and you can't go. It doesn't allow the threat. But there are software companies that actually create nothing is on the whitelist, and then you have to tell everything that's going to be on the whitelist. And they start from you can't do anything on your computer. And you spend so much time administering to the software, you can't actually get any work done. That's the approach that some IT organizations take to being able to function. And they're inside major businesses that call themselves agile. And they go, we're an agile company. We just allow people to make decisions. They just can't have any information to do it with. So, yeah, it's unique.
IT should be run by marketing.
So, I mean, here's what I hear. One is accessibility is key. Like oftentimes we have the right data, but we may not have access to it. You know, there are reasons why we may not have accessibility to this data. It could be security, it could be protocols, it could be, just for whatever reason, restrictions, and which ultimately create these silos. And what I hear from this discussion is almost like we have to run a risk management process, similar to what reliability is doing, a risk management criticality assessment of all the additional process that we create onto the team, the cost associated to it, the cost associated of saying you can't do anything. If you want to do anything, then here's the 3,000 steps you have to go through. And then ultimately weigh the risk of the 1% of the 1% of a bad actor. And I feel like, what I hear from this discussion is that, the easy thing to say, at least from a security perspective or protocols perspective, is, let's just block everything, because that way we don't ever have to run this risk management criticality assessment.
Yeah, no doubt. I think the other major issue in this space is a lack of knowledge at the level in which the data needs to be utilized. Meaning,
sorry, something went wrong.
A complete lack of knowledge of where that's going to be utilized. And so folks don't know what data to even ask for. So they may be trying to solve a problem at the shop floor, but at the shop floor, they don't even know they can ask for data from various areas and compile it on top of each other. A level of increase in knowledge at the shop floor of what data is available, what data warehousing and analytics are, and what they should be asking for to help solve problems, I think is something that would really benefit our community.
Yeah. It's funny, we've invested hugely in technology, and I see this time and time again, companies will spend millions and millions of dollars on technology, make it inaccessible, and then not train anybody on how to use it. Or worse, it's not just training in the technology, but the basics that underlie why you want to use it in the first place. I've run into reliability engineers by title who really don't know much about reliability. And I'm sure in your business, George, you run into that a fair amount. We give people a title and you think they're an expert, but they really don't know enough. And it's not about necessarily the systems, it's about how to use what's in the systems, because they're not quite sure what to do with it once they get it. It's kind of like a dog chasing a car. Well, what does the thing do if he actually catches it? So many people can't use what they get, even if you do let them have access.
What I hear is that, it's about like shifting culture. It's shifting people's mind. It's not just a technology, a data thing. It's about shifting the way that people view problems. It's a culture of a company. And maybe to kind of transition into this next question, as it relates to culture and people, George, obviously really appreciate you contributing to this book, being one of our, experts into this book. You wrote within the book, Asset Operations, you wrote, educate people on how they impact the overall operation of a plant in each one of their own departments, and measure based off of those behaviors. As it goes back to changing culture, measuring based off of behaviors and overall impact to an operation and plant, and ultimately getting to this, better end state. Like, maybe the question here is like, what do you see as like the biggest misstep that companies are making? Like,
ouch, they lack leadership.
So
you lack leadership.
Yeah.
If you hire somebody, so you start out as a small business and then eventually you get so big, you need somebody in procurement. Procurement believes their job is to save money. That's not their job.
Mm-hmm.
Their job is the same as everybody else in a company. Good quality product out the door.
Yeah.
That's the job.
Yeah.
And what you're doing to save a penny may be negatively impacting the overall. No business went into business to say, I'm going to be the business to cut costs the most.
Yeah, exactly.
That's not what they're in business for.
Yeah.
And so you have to make a connection back to what the mission of the organization is. And if people do not understand how they impact that, it's a lack of leadership.
Yep.
It's not their miseducation. It's not their background. It's zero to do with that. If there is anyone in the company that is incapable of delivering what the mission of the business is and how they impact that, it's a leadership issue.
Totally agree. We're underled and overmanaged, and I think that's what it all boils down to. Overmanaged. Let's add more technology to solve this problem. More tech. I'm not against tech, by the way, but I probably sound it. But we don't put the money into the people that actually have to use it. We don't teach people why are they there. It's not just to collect a paycheck at the end of the day. Although that's important, that's not the only reason you're here. And people need to understand that. And that is a lack of leadership. And the management, all the tech, is just more management. That's a manager's solution to a problem that he probably really has no control over anyways. Let's just collect data, as if you could study it to death. It's not going to happen.
The title of this book, Ryan, could just as easily be Lead Better. Lead Better. Because what this book is attempting to achieve is the way an organization should actually be led. Meaning folks, the silos are broken down, the data is available to make good decisions, and people are autonomous to do that. They feel empowered, but lots of organizations say their people are empowered. But empowerment requires someone to be told they're empowered, but that's only part of it. The other piece of it is they have to be able to act on empowerment. Yeah. And to do that, they have to have the knowledge and confidence to do so, and they have to know they're not going to get punished if they make a mistake. You build these silos and give everybody individualized objectives they have to hit every year. They're not empowered to do anything, not in alignment with the company's expectations. And what's in this book, in many pages in this book, are break down silos and get people the information they need to succeed on the company mission. It's over and over and over, regardless of the expert that's being quoted. It's leadership. It's a leadership issue.
Yeah. You're getting many shout outs in our chat from Micah. You got several from Muhammad as well. One question that did come up is, how do you avoid this overmanagement? How do you, one, maybe there's two questions in that. One, how do you avoid this overmanagement? And then two, what can we all do if we notice that there is a problem within our plant, factory, and business today around overmanagement?
I'd like to jump in a little bit on that. I think we need to understand leadership and management are not the same thing.
Absolutely.
I like to say that management is about keeping the boat steady. You follow the procedures, nothing changes. Leadership is about rocking that boat and setting a new course, pointing the direction. And we don't do enough of that. And people are not empowered enough or given enough authority and autonomy to actually execute on those smart things that they see that need to be done. Without getting punished. They're afraid of it. And punishment comes from management, right? The leadership is all about maybe breaking the rules and not punishing somebody if it doesn't go right. I go back to something I heard when I was actually still in university. I was an officer cadet in the Canadian Navy in training that summer. And we had one of the admirals from our Navy came in and talked to this group of us. There's probably about 50 of us in the room. And he said, I'd much rather have one junior officer making 100 decisions and have 99 of those decisions being wrong than to have 100 junior officers that won't make a decision. Mm-hmm. And that has stuck with me my entire career. And there was a guy who actually made it to the top in the Canadian military. He was saying it's not wrong to make mistakes, not wrong at all. It's important to make decisions and pick a direction and go there. That's leadership. Management would study it to death. So we've got to stop doing that. We've got to stop enabling that. Maybe we don't need management schools. Maybe we need some leadership schools. That was one nice thing about the military. You got that in spades. maybe there's a question, how do you avoid over management? Maybe we should put everybody in the military for a couple of years.
Conscription is not a terrible thing.
They'll figure it out pretty quickly. And it doesn't have to be long.
2 years stint. Yeah. I think so for me, Ryan, there's really quickly, when we think about data and structuring data and decisions that we make with the data, the organization is much like data. Today, from a management perspective, as James is saying, people don't make decisions. They typically don't make decisions because they don't have active meetings with the purpose of making a decision. So what happens is they have this meeting and are looking for consensus, and that's not the way data works. Data tells you the decision. And so they run the company unlike data. The agenda is simple. Come with the information I need so I can make a decision. It's my decision to make. I am going to collaborate with everyone, but at the end of the day, I make the choice because that's my role in the business. The data doesn't care about all that, right? So you analyze data and there's an outcome. Aside from all my statistical friends that'll agree with me that I can make any chart look good or bad, the data is going to give you what reality is. But we don't manage the business the same way. And so the same way that James is saying, understand the end, design everything to provide you what you need to make a decision, that doesn't happen in the conference room. The second reason the leadership is a big issue is because no one's on the plant floor. They're all trying to make decisions with data. Now, what I mean by that is they don't see the problem in their head. They don't know what the real problem is. They'll say, we're not meeting customer demand. Let's figure out why we're not meeting customer demand. They'll analyze all this information, but never talk to the shop floor. And so if there's no data point directly correlating to the actual issue, they will chase down the wrong path every time. And so if we're not meeting demand because we're allowing poor quality in the package, but all we know is we're not delivering on time, we're going to be chasing not delivering on time, thinking there's a transportation issue or whatever the issue is. Meanwhile, we have lots on hold because of poor product quality, but there's not a data point in the same database from the person that did the analysis, which is why it all needs to come together, why it all needs to be in one place, and it needs to be holistic and understanding what the purpose of the organization is, not the silo thing, right? So because we chase the wrong stuff all the time if it's not in our database.
Something that I've noticed quite often is that people want more data quite frequently. We need more information, and what they really mean is they want to collect more data. They want to waste more time. People are not comfortable making decisions with a degree of uncertainty. And that comes from the fear of making a mistake or being punished for making a mistake because all you tried to do is do your job. And I think that's a cultural shift that has to happen. And that's going to require some leadership just to make the cultural change. But people do need to get more comfortable with uncertainty. In the reliability field, we deal with it all the time. In fact, the more reliable your equipment is, the less data you're going to have about failures to tell you that it's unreliable. So I do a lot of reliability center maintenance work, and people say, well, we haven't got enough data for that. And so if you wait for the data, you'll be closing the plant down before we can do the analysis. So we're going to have to make some decisions here based on, your experience on similar stuff. What you think may happen here based on your experience. Your experience is valuable. And we tend to discount the human element in decision-making, like the fact that the guys on the shop floor have seen it before. And all you got to do is ask. They'll tell you. You might get a story with it. That's fine. That makes your day more colorful. But we can't rely solely on data. And I think we've raised a generation, or maybe a couple of generations by now, of managers who are a little bit too wed to computers and data. And as George put it, they don't get out on the shop floor enough. They need to get out there where the world really is, and get out of the get out from behind the screen. And now that's not that there's anything wrong with the data that we do collect. I think if it's automated collection, it's going to be pretty accurate. If it's manual collection, it's probably not. That's been my experience with it. But we need to get used to that fact that it's not all perfect. It's not all there. It won't always be complete. It won't always be correct. And there's going to be some question unanswered. But its decision still needs to be made.
So if I were to summarize everything that I just heard, goes back to the original question, how do you avoid over management? It really comes back to this idea that management is, just keeping status quo. To drive leadership, it's all about change. And to drive change, we have to be okay with uncertainty, a certain level of uncertainty. Mm-hmm. I think the contrarian, point of view here is how do we risk mitigate the like the 1% of the 1% of decisions, if we're working in oil gas, for example, where that one failure could actually be that one decision. Yes, we should push to drive decisions, but that one wrong decision that we make could be catastrophic to the organization. I think what I hear from this discussion is that, yes, we obviously do need to avoid these catastrophic mistakes, but what I hear from you is that 99.9% of the decisions that we have to make on a daily basis are commonly inconsequential, that we should just push to drive, to a decision and not get into the state of analysis paralysis. How'd I do?
It's accurate.
Yeah, that's actually really good. It's hard to summarize when you got people that talk so much. That is a skill.
All right.
But I just, to me, it's just, get over the fact that you're not going to have everything you need all the time, and it's not going to be really comfortable, and some of the times it's going to go wrong, and the data you've got is all historic. It tells you what happened in the past. It doesn't tell you what might happen in the future, and there are always things that could crop up that you didn't see coming, and no matter how carefully you analyze the past and do whatever you can to mitigate risks that are a result of what you did do in the past, there's still something that could come and bite you at the end of the day. And there's not a thing you can really do about that. And we all, I think, need to accept that. We can't solve every possible problem, mitigate every possible risk, because we're frankly not smart enough to identify every possible risk. We can look at the ones that have happened before. We can postulate what could happen. We can use our experience on similar things. We can do that, but we can still miss things. And I've done loads and loads of work where people are making decisions, and I don't give them a lot of time to make a decision. If they start waffling, going around in circles, hey guys, you're talking too much. Let's just make a decision and move on. If you need more data, who's going to take the action item to go collect it and bring it back and explain it to us for the next meeting? And they all go silent.
Look, today you have nothing, right? Something is better than nothing. If it's wrong, we can make a correction. That's still better than the nothing you have today.
Yeah. That's totally right. And again, I think that really helps sum this entire discussion up, George. It's like something is better than nothing. It's one of our core values here at Upkeep, actually. It's this idea of progress over perfection. Our bar for anything that we do is it better than it was yesterday? If the answer is yes, then ship it, release it, move forward with that decision. And even if the answer is, I don't know, to your point, George, well, knowing is still better than not knowing. Knowing that you're wrong is still better than not knowing.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you're just delaying, right? It's just delay. So, no doubt.
Yeah, and delaying is just it's just a stalling tactic because of fear of making a mistake. We all love to be perfect.
From what? Lack of knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really pretty simple.
Keep coming to
All right.
webinars and learning.
This-
You got to work with a whole bunch of companies and see all the things that happen to become cynical like we are.
George, James, this has been a really fun conversation. Before I wrap up, I want to quickly both ask the two of you guys. Obviously, we've had a pretty lively discussion. We've talked about data, we've talked about culture, we talked about driving decisions. What is one takeaway that you hope that you hope all of our listeners take away from today's conversation? Either one of you guys can start.
For me, it's raise your bar and expectation. And I know the whole conversation's about data, but data is still there to be a facilitation of organizational objectives. So if you're unsure why your organization is in business, go to www.insertyourcompanynamehere.com/about-us and figure it out. And then figure out what in your area of expertise, what information will help you achieve that. And if you do that, you'll be successful.
I love that. I mean, it's a very simple approach. Understanding the why. Why does this business exist? To produce product services for their customers, and trying to associate your role, what you do on a daily basis, to that business outcome. Really, that's the central theme behind this vision of asset operations, or to your point, lead better.
Yeah. I think what I'd say is think first. Don't jump to a solution until you really know what the problem is, and then think it through. I think that's key. Data will help you along the way, but remember, it's part of this of solving the problem. It isn't the solution to the problem, and that's going to require a little bit of brain work and a little bit of common sense. That's what I take out of this.
And from what I hear from you too, James, it's a little bit, being okay with being uncomfortable with not having, the perfect data set that drives every single decision.
That's so true. You'll never get a perfect data set.
All right. Well, George, James, thank you so much for the amazing conversation. I personally learned a ton. We do have just a couple minutes for some questions. So I know that we've got a ton of other people still here in the chat with us live. If you've got any questions for us, drop them into the chat. We'll try to get through as many as we can in the short time that we have. We already have a few that I'm going to scroll up right here and try to ask and see if we get some answers and thoughts. The first one comes from Mohammed. He's asking, how do you fix issues with manual data collection, dealing with service industries where you have to rely on human inspectors to collect most of the data? So I think the question is really centered around data is important to helping make decisions. People, and I think, James, you mentioned this, are not the most accurate. We got fat fingers.
This one's fairly simple. Directionally correct is enough to make a good choice.
Better than it was yesterday. Exactly.
That's exactly right.
The other piece is standardize as much as you possibly can and have a standard. I know that sounds bizarre, but if you're going to give something a scale of 1 to 5 and ask them to select one, have something that what a 1 looks like. Yeah. What does that look like? Give me some pictorials that say, if you're going to choose 3, don't have 3 because everything will be 3. It's 1, 2, 4, 5. So, give them an understanding of what the expectation looks like. If you're going to tell somebody they have to clean their line every day, have a posted cleaning standard. This is what clean looks like. And then when you have an audit against it, you're auditing against the standard. This is what a perfect score looks like. Go downward from there, right? There needs to be a standard in place and an explanation of the standard. That's still not going to get you perfect. Yeah. The rest of it's directionally correct.
Yeah, I agree that the directionally correct. I think from Mohammed's question, get used to the fact that it's not going to be perfect. It'll probably be a little bit more, a little bit better than it was before. You'll have some piece of knowledge, but it may not be perfect, and that's okay. I think the other thing is you're relying on human inspectors. Your human inspectors better know what they're looking at, and that's where the standards that George mentions come in. Don't just send anybody out there with a clipboard and expect to get meaningful information coming back. They better know what they're looking at, what they're inspecting.
Yep. It's, how I think what it all comes down to again is like leadership, driving trust in, the people, the team that you have.
Yeah.
James, George, thank you so much for joining today's discussion. Thank you to all of our listeners who participated live, and thank you to everyone who's also watching this recording, at a later date and in time. I really want to say thank you one more time to our incredible panelists for participating. I'm super pumped to hear your feedback on this book. So if you want to get a copy, you can go to Amazon. Blair actually dropped the link to actually, get the book and also provide some feedback to us. We have 2 more webinars coming up next month. That's really diving into the rest of the AOM pillars. So if you want, go to our upkeep.com, go to the events page, and register for those 2 events. Again, I think Blair actually dropped in the next event here in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, George, James, everyone. I really appreciate it. If you want to reach me or any of us, you can reach me directly on LinkedIn. I know George is on LinkedIn. I know that James is on LinkedIn. Find us. Tell us what you thought about today's discussion, and let's keep it going. We continuously learn from, our audience, our community members, people in the industry. I really appreciate it. I can't say thank you enough. Have a great rest of your day. I'll talk to you all soon. Thanks.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, James. This was a lot of fun. Thanks, Ryan.
Yeah, it was. Thank you very much. Take care.